In Iraq, the American soldiers are in the middle of a big battle. Miles and his friends hide in a crumbling building while they shoot at the enemy. Sadly, their captain gets shot in the neck and dies in Miles' arms. Suddenly, an explosion shakes the building and a bright light flashes. Miles runs out to keep fighting, but as he runs up a hill, a bullet hits him in the stomach and he falls down. Miles looks up and sees two missile-like objects flying by, followed by a strange aircraft. The aircraft shines a light on him, and he screams before passing out. When he wakes up, he's in pain and finds himself in a strange room with no windows or doors, just gray walls everywhere. Even though he's hurt, he tries to stand up and look around, but he falls down again. He calls for help, but no one comes, so he uses his supplies to clean and wrap his wound. He tries to use his radio, but it doesn't work. Then, he notices the word abandon on the wall, which wasn't there before. He tries asking for help in another language, but nothing happens. Now the wall says abandon all, and the floor reads save the sinner's soul. Miles looks again, and the message changes to abandon all hope. Feeling dizzy, he takes off his backpack and clothes because the room is getting really hot. He starts sweating a lot and gets scared, hitting the wall and begging to be let out. His sweat boils when it touches the ground, and Miles starts to wonder if he's dead. He feels like he's losing his mind and grabs his gun to shoot at the walls. The heat gets too much for him, and he falls to the ground, screaming in pain before passing out. When he wakes up, the temperature is back to normal. He quickly grabs his flask to drink some water, but suddenly the room starts spinning. Miles and his stuff get thrown around, and he gets hurt each time he hits the walls. After a few minutes, the spinning stops, and Miles notices the room has moved because the words are now in different places. To his surprise, some of his things are stuck on the ceiling. At first, he panics, thinking it's a dream, but then he calms down and tries the radio again. After a long silence, he hears a woman's voice, but the call ends quickly. Miles thinks the room might be messing with the signal and remembers he has a cell phone, which is now stuck on the ceiling. Miles can't remember the number, so he uses his binoculars to read it off a sticker and carves it on the floor with his knife. Suddenly, the phone rings. Miles tries to jump and grab it, but it hurts his wound even more. He then throws a shoe at it, but the shoe gets stuck on the ceiling too. Suddenly, frost appears on the walls. Miles quickly puts on whatever clothes he can find and curls up into a ball as the frost starts covering his face. But just as quickly as it came, the frost disappears, leaving Miles with purple, freezing fingers. He rubs his body to get warm, and the phone rings again. But this time, he just waves it off in frustration. An alarm blares, and the room starts spinning again. The phone falls, and Miles gets thrown around painfully, but he manages to grab the phone just as the spinning stops. He also finds his helmet and pulls out a picture of his wife and daughter, tucking it safely in his pocket. He chews some gum he hid before the battle and checks the phone's call log, dialing the number that just called him. At first, there's only static, but then he hears a woman's voice. She says she's been kidnapped and is stuck in a spinning room. Miles asks her to describe it, and they realize they're in the exact same kind of room. The woman says there are no lights, but she can still see, and Miles realizes they must be glowing somehow. Miles tries to ask more questions to learn about the woman, but she gets scared, thinking he's part of a trick. Miles gets upset and shouts that he's trapped too and is also hurt. The woman, now crying, apologizes and agrees to work together. She says her name is Damsey, and before she was kidnapped, she was on the highway. Miles remembers his team was near the highway, and Damsey asks if he was stationed there. This freaks Miles out because he never told her he was a soldier. Damsey quickly explains she just guessed based on how he talked. Suddenly, Damsey stops talking and starts groaning in pain. At the same time, Miles' dog tags get yanked back, and the chain starts choking him. An invisible force pulls his arms apart, making him drop the phone. His body floats upwards, then crashes back down. The phone slips from Damsey's hand as the room begins to change. Miles warns her, but instead of spinning, the walls start closing in. Panic sets in as he pushes against the relentless pressure, only to collapse. When he wakes, the room is smaller. Damsey calls, terrified. She guides him through the fear as the enclosure tightens. Damsey curses as she injures herself. They see strange symbols on the walls. Damsey confirms they are in the same place. She clarifies she was taken from a Massachusetts highway, not kidnapped. Miles is confused. The realization hits them both. They are in a controlled environment. Damsey is a normal person, not a target. Fear grips them both as they try to understand. Miles yells to see if they are neighbors, but the sound is muffled. He wonders how she got his number. Another call comes in, a foreign voice warning of failure and death. The line goes dead. They discuss the impossible situation. Damsey, an algebra teacher, tries to find logic in the madness. They share their personal struggles, finding solace in their shared ordeal. Suddenly, the room starts glowing brightly, and a piercing noise fills the air, making Miles' ears hurt. Despite the pain, he checks his watch and notices the strange movements in the room are happening more often. He quickly scribbles the times on his arm before clutching his head, screaming in agony, and then passing out. When he wakes up, he's trembling and struggling to breathe. The phone nearby is ringing, but he can barely reach it. Then, the word "answer" appears on the wall, so he forces himself to pick up the call. It's Damsey on the other end, and she tells him there's not enough air. As he looks around, he realizes the room has gotten even smaller. Damsey has a theory. She thinks that she, Miles, and others are all in the same room but in different years. She asks Miles to draw something on the wall, so he makes an X. A moment later, in Damsey's time, the year 2020, she sees the X and draws a hand around it. Damsey talks about the fourth dimension and how she's always been good at math. This prompts Miles to admit he's good at math too, though he was never the academic type. Feeling exhausted, Miles collapses while pointing out that the strange changes to the room might be some sort of test by unknown beings. He asks Damsey about the future and feels sad when he learns that a war is still ongoing. He refers to it as the sins of the father and shares that his own dad fought in Vietnam. Just then, he passes out again. When he wakes up, Miles notices his Arabic dictionary has fallen out of his bag, and some of the symbols match those on the wall. He starts translating the message and writes it on the floor for Damsey to see. It turns out to be an equation that Damsey recognizes from a famous mathematician who studied higher dimensions but never finished his work. They realize that the people trapped with them might all be connected to math somehow. Suddenly, someone starts scribbling over the Arabic equation and its translation. So Miles quickly writes what he remembers on his arm. Damsey then confesses that she's a teacher, but she actually has an advanced degree in math. Her fiancé got her the teaching job because he doesn't like it when she talks smart. She asks Miles if the war changed him, making him hurt someone he loves. Miles explains that war turns people into animals, and he shares a painful memory of how his dad used to beat his mom, and how powerless he felt as a child. Damsey manages to remember the equation, and Miles asks her to write it on the wall before anything changes again. But as she's scratching the wall with her keys, the room starts shaking, and Miles feels a strong force pulling him down. His hands and knees are pinned to the ground, and even a bullet is pulled out of his wound, causing him to bleed more. He screams as the force intensifies, but after a few minutes, it's over. Miles reaches for the phone again, but it has a cracked screen. Then, an alarm goes off, and the room starts spinning. Since the room is now smaller, Miles can jump from wall to wall instead of being thrown around. The spinning stops quickly, and the lights go out for a few seconds. When they come back on, the room has shrunk even more. Miles, trembling, tries the phone. At first, nothing happens, but then Damsey answers. She's interrupted by a call from a foreign man who keeps saying something about a failed sacrifice, which Miles doesn't understand, so he hangs up. When he talks to Damsey again, she tells him she broke her arm, is running out of battery, and that death might be their only option. Miles realizes that Damsey has been working with the foreign man all along, and she finally reveals that they were captured by a superior species testing human intelligence to see if they're a threat. Damsey thinks people aren't smart enough to beat the aliens, but Miles believes they can control the room if they focus hard enough. While Damsey is thinking about a tricky puzzle that might help them escape, the lights suddenly go out. In the dark, Miles starts shouting at the aliens, even though Damsey tries to calm him down. Then, Miles starts remembering sad things from the past, like when he was in a war and when his dad hurt his mom. These memories make him feel very scared and sad. He falls to the floor, trying to grab his toy gun, but he can't stop the bad thoughts in his head. After a while, the memories go away, and Miles tells the aliens that they've won. He's so upset that he even thinks about hurting himself. Miles feels like he's turning into his dad, but he doesn't want to be like him. He reminds himself that he's different and lowers the toy gun. Then he calls out to Damsey, who is also crying. She tells him about the time when her fiancé hurt her and how she finally ran away. But as she was driving fast, she crashed, and that's when the aliens took her. Damsey asks Miles if he ever hurt his wife. He says no, but he did think about it, which makes Damsey upset. She stops talking to him. Then, a strange man calls and tells Miles that he shouldn't try to solve the puzzle. He warns that if they succeed, humans might become as dangerous as the aliens. The man says it's better if the aliens think humans are harmless, like little mice in a lab. Suddenly, the alarm rings, and the room starts shrinking again. Miles tries to stop it but can't, and soon his body is twisted in a very tight space. At that moment, Damsey calls again and asks the same question. Miles swears he never hits his family. He has urges but fights against them to avoid being like his dad. Miles thinks he's sick, and that's why Damsey should be the one to solve the equation. He believes she's the better person and the one who deserves to get out. He apologizes for who he is and for what Damsey went through, and Damsey forgives him. Miles asks her to find his family and tell them he loves them and that they deserve better. Now, Damsey feels strong enough to finish the equation. She uses the time between the room's movements as clues. The answer is 1, so Damsey tries to concentrate on controlling the room and spinning it 1 time, but nothing happens. Damsey thinks about it and realizes that one person alone can't be a threat. The answer means mankind is 1. The aliens want to see if humans can stop fighting and work together. Miles concentrates and starts pushing the room too, helping Damsey. The duo screams together until the room suddenly explodes into a bright light. To their shock, Damsey and Miles see each other. The wall panels float around them too, showing all the other people who were kidnapped. This means they've solved the equation and freed all the victims. Damsey and Miles greet each other and share a smile before they disappear into the light. Moments later, Miles appears back in Iraq. He begins heading toward his team, only to hear sirens blaring and see planes flying overhead. When he reaches the American troops, they are staring at something dangerous in the sky.